What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Classic Octane. I am Taylor. Two quick things before we get started today. One, new shirt designs are now live on my site. This is one of them, and we have an additional design as well. People on Instagram seem to really be liking it, so if you have any desire in getting some Classic Octane merch, I encourage you to go to the link in the description below and go and check out those designs if that's something you're into. If not, no big deal. Next update is the BMW R65 project. Unfortunately, we are still waiting for parts. Most of the parts for this bike are still a week to potentially 2 weeks out, so it'll probably be right after Thanksgiving when we really do a deep dive into this project. So it is still very much alive. We are just unfortunately having the same issue that a lot of people are right now with parts and supply chain stuff, and I want to have the majority of these parts on hand before we really start to deep dive into this build. So project is very much alive, just waiting on parts. So with that stuff out of the way, let me show you a new toy I got. So here she is in all of her glory. So this is a particularly rough example of a C5 Z06 Corvette. So this is a 2001, the first year of the C5 Z06, actually the exact same year that I had previously. So I owned a C5 Z about 10 or 12 years ago, and it's always kind of haunted me. It was one of the cars I regretted getting rid of. I traded it on a Jeep Rubicon, and I only had that Jeep for like 6 months before I traded that in, and I just had always missed that car. So I knew I wanted to get another one at some point. About a year and a half ago, I decided I wanted to build a dedicated track slash drift car. It is still going to be street legal, but it's going to spend a whole heck of a lot of time sideways and burning tires and at the track and really getting beat up on. So I definitely didn't want to start with a nice clean example. I wanted to start with basically this, a rough example of a C5Z that is a diamond in the rough that we can build into whatever we want. So this car popped up on auction a couple of weeks ago, and it was kind of a perfect storm of things that made it reasonably priced. So the auction house had it listed as not running, which really didn't concern me all that much because I figured, hey, we can either get it running, worst case scenario, the engine's blown. You guys know from my last Will It Run video, I just picked up a running C5 drivetrain that we can drop that LS1 in here with a new cam and whatever we want to put in there, and it'll make more power than the LS6 that came in this. So I wasn't too worried about the engine being bad. Also, I have a ton of rear suspension parts and everything from that same drivetrain that in theory we can fix most of the rear end with those parts as well. So besides the cosmetics, I pretty much had everything else I needed to get this car up and running. I'll show you guys here in just a minute or two why that didn't end up being the case, and we are very pleasantly surprised with what's under the hood of this thing. But again, getting ahead of myself, what I didn't expect is less than a week later to buy another one. So this blue one is a 2004. It's actually the 50th anniversary edition. That is a theft recovery. So this car was stolen at one point. The insurance company then recovered it and sold it to the guy that I bought it from. You can see that it still has the auction sticker and the writing and stuff on it. So this car actually does not have a drivetrain at all. It's got no engine, transmission, or diff in it right now. It did come with a spare rear cradle with a diff on it, as well as a manual trans. And then, as you guys know, I have the LS1 that I just talked about a second ago that we can put in this car. So what I'm waiting on is if I get a title for this thing or not. So the guy that I bought it from is in the process of transferring the title into his name and is supposed to give it to me, but I'm not going to hold my breath. You know, it's like I checked the VIN to make sure it's not actively currently stolen. Everything looks fine. It's just I don't know if he's going to be able to get the title and what that's going to be, and if he's just going to be over it and not even respond to me anymore. So it's kind of up in the air on if I get a title for this car or not. So that will kind of determine its fate. If I'm able to get a title for the blue one, it probably makes the most sense for us to pull the drivetrain out of the black one, put it into the blue one, and you know, wrap it or whatever we want to do to make it look good cosmetically and kind of be good to go. If I don't get a title for it, we will then take this whole rear end as well as the fiberglass tub on the inside, transplant it over to the black one, and then this car will donate its chassis in combination with the LS1 and you know, the rest of the Corvette parts I already have, and we'll turn that into some kind of crazy vet cart, hot rod, something down the road. So I have a use for most of this car if we don't have a title, and then we will build it into a driving car if we do get a title. But let me give you a little bit more details about the black one. So after I picked this car up, I was able to look at the previous owner's name on the title, and that's where this got really interesting. So I looked at his name, I Googled his name, found his Instagram, and found basically everything that's done to this car. I assume that it was wrecked at the drag strip for two reasons. One, it has drag radials on the back with mismatched wheels, as well as I'm pretty sure, if I remember from the last time I was at the drag strip, this writing is what they write on your window right after you go through tech at the drag strip. So this yellow and some of the other ones are from the auction house, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe that this 1025 is, you know, you just went through tech on the 25th of October, and that's to kind of let the track know that your car's already been teched and you're ready to go down the strip. So I'm thinking maybe he took it to the drag strip, lost control, and maybe put this back end into the wall. Even more exciting than that is what's under the hood. So it's not going to look like much, but I'll let you hear it in a second. This car does not have the LS6 in it anymore. It has a 408 stroker with an LS3 intake, LS3 heads, a bunch of Texas speed parts like long tubes. It's got some sort of cam in it. I don't know any specs or anything, obviously, but definitely has a larger than stock cam. So this was a huge surprise. You know, I expected maybe a blown LS6, you know, worst case scenario, and we got a full forged bottom end 408 stroker that he didn't post any of the exact specs on his Instagram, but there's, you know, pictures of him putting the engine together, putting it in the car, and I'm quite confident that this is the exact engine that was just posted on his Instagram. I, truth be told, didn't reach out to him because one, I think it would be kind of weird of like, hey, I bought your old car. Two, I don't really want him to know who has his car now in case he's some kind of crazy guy and he wants his car back and he tries to come take it or whatever. But let me set you guys up on a tripod and I'm going to start this thing for you. So I did have to cut the right muffler off because it was kind of wedged in and was blocking that wheel from being able to turn. I wasn't able to get it off of the trailer. So it is going to be even a little bit louder because of that. But let's hear this thing. So you can see she is ugly, but she's also angry. So as you can hear, this thing sounds like a beast, and it seems very well tuned as well. It idles well for having a decent sized cam. There's no lights on the dash or anything, so I know it's all been tuned because it doesn't have any cats or anything, and it's been adjusted for that. So it's actually going to pass Texas emissions laws, which is very nice to see in a swapped car. One downside that apparently while this car was sitting at the auction lot, somebody decided they wanted that shifter really bad. So they got in here, they ripped half the plastic on the console off, and they stole the short throw shifter out of it. I did go back and look at the pictures from the listing, and there was a shifter in there. When I got delivery of the car, it was gone. So that is a bit unfortunate, but with the trade-off of having a fully built 408, I'll take that trade any day of the week. The rest of the interior is as you would expect on a 20-year-old Corvette. It was never that good, even when it started. So stuff is kind of falling off and pieces are, broken here and there. The seat's super rough. We're going to replace a lot of this with, racing seats and a different steering wheel and kind of get rid of a lot of stuff anyway, because again, this is going to be a track car. So I'm not too terribly concerned about it. We're going to keep most of the interior because I want it to still be decent to drive on the street, but most of the worn out items are going to be replaced anyway. So it's not a huge concern. So now I'm going to start to tear into the back end of the car. I just want to get a lot of these damaged components out of the way, as well as really start to wrap my brain around the extent of the damage to the rear suspension. So I'm going to start to tear this apart and I'll show you guys what it looks like in there. So I'll give you guys a rundown of the body damage first. Luckily, this rocker panel is all in perfect shape. So the damage did not get into that. Which I'm very happy about because that is a huge pain. It's directly bonded to the frame, and apparently they're very difficult to remove, very difficult to install new ones without them being damaged. So I'm very glad that we don't have to mess with that. The fender took a brunt of the impact. It is mostly gone. This whole piece right here is the rear fender. Obviously our tub is heavily damaged as well, so we'll have to determine the best way to replace that. Should we be stealing the one off of the blue car? If we want to just kind of break the seal and replace this whole kind of right rear section, if we want to like cut it in a pretty easily accessible place and cut the other one in the exact same spot and then just fiberglass them together. That's all this is a fiberglass tub. It doesn't have to be cosmetically perfect because it's going to be hidden behind a fender anyway. And then obviously our rear bumper and all that kind of stuff took some damage as well. The crash bar in the back did take a little bit of damage. I had to straighten it out a little bit already off camera just so that I could get this rear wheel moving so I could get this thing off my trailer. But that's kind of the extent of the cosmetic damage. Obviously our trunk is missing as well. So it's not a small amount to fix, but a lot of these components are not a crazy difficult thing. The rear quarters and stuff on Corvettes are all bolt-in. They're not even bonded to the car. So the suspension also truthfully fared pretty well. We have a knuckle that is completely broken. You can see that's not good. I'm not supposed to do that. But our upper and lower control arms are perfectly fine, which means all of the mounts and everything are perfectly fine. It looks like our upper shock mount, and I don't know if you guys will be able to see it, is just a little bit tweaked. So you can see that shock, and I apologize for the sun being right where we're trying to film, but the shock is bent right in the middle right there. So I'll have to look and I'll have to take a good shock off of one of my donor cars, bolt it into the bottom and see how far off that top shock mount is and see if it's, my guess is maybe a 1/4 inch. And I think that's something we're going to be able to straighten out. It doesn't have any kind of cracks. It's not separated from the frame or anything crazy like that. So it doesn't look like that's going to be a crazy thing to repair. It looks like our rear sway bar and also our tie rod are also bent. So we'll have to replace both of those components. Other than that, I mean, even the axle's still in good shape. Again, the control arms are good. The rear caliper is good, except for the little mount is broken. So I'll have to replace that as well. But for as bad as this thing looked, this is really not bad. I mean, we're talking about, what, 3 components and a little bit of a straightening of a shock mount to get this thing back to a rolling state. I'm going to go ahead and work on removing all of these broken components, getting a lot of this stuff out of the way so we can gain access to our shock mount and see how far out it is. All this stuff is just flying off. Check out how incredibly lucky I am. This is a shock off of one of the donor cars, and our shock mount isn't even bent at all. I thought it was just because it kind of looks kind of at a funny angle, but verifying with a replacement shock. And also, I'm sure you won't be able to see it buried in there, I measured the angles and stuff off of a uncrashed car, and it's not bent at all. It's literally going to be unbolted broken stuff, bolt back in good replacement parts, and like it's going to be good to go. Like that is huge. I fully expected this thing to have like tweaked frame that we were going to have to try and fix, and like a broken diff, or I don't want to jinx myself, but I don't really believe in that. Like this is
Really, really exciting. So I'm gonna keep going. I gotta remove this, what is that called? Tie rod end. I don't know if it's called the tie rod if it's not in the steering, but basically a tie rod. And then I'm like 98% sure our sway bar is bent, as I mentioned. So I'm just gonna go ahead and swap in the other Z06 sway bar that I have, and we're gonna keep on trucking. So comparing the sway bar with a known good one, it actually looks like there is no damage. So that's another kind of surprising thing. I assumed for sure that this right side was going to be bent in, but it looks like it just popped our end link out of the lower control arm. But that actually doesn't even look damaged. It just looks like the little ball came out of the socket. So that should be an easy thing to put back in there. And I'll just kind of re-grease all this up. We'll use the polyurethane bushings that were already on the car and start to put this thing back together. So what I need to do now is actually figure out where I'm going to source my knuckle from. So obviously our knuckle is completely shattered. I don't want to take the one off of this car because I want this to remain a roller. And then I'm guessing, you know, what makes the most sense is for me to just steal it off of this. This does actually, this is the spare rear cradle that came with the blue car. It actually came with C5 Z06 rear brakes, which is awesome. But if I'm not mistaken, this knuckle should still be the same. It's just going to be a different caliper mounted on there. So we'll probably just steal the knuckle off of this thing. And then I believe we're ready to start to put everything back together. And just like that, it's all back together. Didn't run into any other issues. I did steal a caliper bracket off of my rolling chassis, but everything else went together exactly like you would expect. No more damage found or anything too crazy. So the next thing I need to do is actually check our rear diff and make sure that all of that's good to go. But I'm waiting for my new short throw shifter to come in. It should be here sometime today. Once that comes in, I can install it. We can fire the car up and kind of run it through the gears and just double check that, you know, this axle didn't get rammed into the diff and cause some kind of internal damage or something like that. I don't see any damage to the outside of the diff, so fingers crossed everything on the inside is good to go as well. But when that shifter gets here, we'll install it, and then we can actually kind of run this thing through some gears and test it out. I'm still waiting on some of those shifter parts to come in, but what I'm going to do now is just manually kind of put the car in gear and start it up, let the clutch out, and just verify that everything's spinning like it should. There's no binding, there's no weird noises from the transmission or diff or anything like that. So let's fire it up. I'm gonna grab something to help me put it in gear. I'm happy to report that test went great. There doesn't seem to be any issues that popped up. Everything's spinning nice and smooth, no grinding or binding or any weird noises. Of course, when we get the car out on the road and actually start to row through some gears, that is an opportunity for some kind of unknown issues to pop up. But at first first inspection, everything seems to be doing great, which is such a huge relief. This car is coming back together much better than I thought it would. I honestly thought it was going to be a lot more work to get this thing back onto the road. So mechanically, we are just about there. cosmetically, we still have a while to go. So I want to kind of ask you guys for some help. What do you think we should do for the fiberglass repair on this tub? So there's kind of 3 options. One, try to repair what we have here. So cutting out a lot of the damage and kind of just making my own molds and just kind of a rough fiberglass shell. Just to get us back on the road. All of this is going to be covered by body panels anyway, so it doesn't necessarily have to look perfect or look OEM. So that's an option. I've never messed with fiberglass before, so I have absolutely no idea how difficult that would be, but it could be a fun learning curve. Option 2 is if I don't get a title for this blue car, we can cut the tub out of the blue car, you know, like somewhere around here, all around the bottom, and then somewhere past the damaged section, and kind of replace this whole rear right section of this tub with the good fiberglass tub out of the blue car. We are going to be stealing the blue car's fender and trunk and everything like I mentioned earlier, so that's another option. Then option 3, which is a lot more difficult, is I could kind of I think what's called back half this car, which is where we kind of remake this back tub out of sheet metal. That is kind of a far-fetched option because I've never done anything to that capacity before, but it is technically an option. So I'm curious what you guys think we should do. Well, that's where I'm going to call it on the first Corvette rebuild episode. I actually got a lot more done in this video than I thought we would. So in the next one, we'll probably be moving on to the cosmetics, potentially also a test drive as well. We'll just kind of see what we get into. I have a couple more parts on the way for the car, angle kit and some other cool stuff that we'll be installing in the not too distant future. So I appreciate you guys watching this one as always. I promise we'll get back onto the BMW R65 motorcycle build as soon as those parts come in. I just talked to the guy yesterday and he said there's still probably a week to potentially 2 weeks out. So hopefully in the not too distant future we can transition back to that project and get it going as well, and we'll just kind of flip-flop between all the different projects I have going on around here. So I appreciate you guys watching as always, and I'll see you in the next one.